Today we'll be dealing with the various aspects of the Secretary General's disarmament agenda. In the first place, disarmament to save humanity, which is primarily aimed at the elimination of nuclear weapons, but also at the prevention of the use of other weapons of mass destruction. We have seen the use of chemical weapons recently, and it's aimed at ensuring that those prohibitions are also held, and also to ensure that we don't have new domains of strategic conflict arising. The second item in the agenda is basically aimed, disarmament to save lives, is basically aimed at addressing the objectives of mitigating the humanitarian impact of conventional weapons, and also to prevent the excessive accumulation, the unregulated small arms and light weapons, as well as the illicit trafficking in small arms and light weapons. And then the last pillar we'll be talking about today will be disarmament for future generations. And that's predominantly aimed at, while we have tremendous benefits in new technologies, these technologies, we mustn't be dismissive about the implications that they can have on international peace and security. And therefore we need to understand and also gather knowledge on what those implications can be. With that being said, you have three very interesting panels today, and we're going to hand back to Emilie to continue with this discussion. But thank you very much. I hope you make the best of today. We're very excited to be endeavoring to move forward on this particular issue. So, Emilie, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Marco. It's such a pleasure to work with ODA today to build this event from the beginning, and having representatives here to give it the insight of really how the United Nations is working towards disarmament, and then to also see how an international NGO affiliated with the United Nations is also able to push forward this agenda. So I'd like to introduce a little bit, first of all, about our organization, so you know a little more about the ship that you're on. As you know, this is the Peace Boat. Now we're on the 8th floor of the ship, and this ship holds 1,000 participants as we are traveling the world, visiting more than 20 countries every 3 months. We have also the SDGs logo painted on the side of the ship, and Peace Boat really works on all 17 of the SDGs. So as we are traveling the world, we are promoting sustainable development and sailing as a flagship for the UN Sustainable Development Goals around the world. And just recently, we have also launched a youth scholarship for the SDGs. So as all of you mostly are between the ages, let's say, of 16 and 35, somewhere in that range, I would encourage you to look at our website. And if you're interested, this summer, we'll be hosting a program on board the ship, traveling from Panama to Costa Rica and Mexico on board as our Youth for the SDGs scholars. So I hope you can join us in a future voyage somewhere during the Peace Boat's global travels. These are the different routes of the Peace Boat. So we always start in Japan. Our head office is in Tokyo. As Mr. Marco mentioned, Peace Boat was founded in 1983 by university students about your age who are passionate about building peace and friendship around the world. And so our ship always leaves from Japan and then travels all around the world, visiting many different countries and building partnerships with civil society, governments, youth, and many different actors as global citizens around the world. Our main purpose on the Peace Boat is peace education. So we have guest speakers and educators who come on board and give lectures and workshops, just like we're doing here today. There might be more than 40 or 50 events each and every day on the Peace Boat. And they're not only organized by the Peace Boat staff members, but also by the people who are traveling on the ship. So you're able to share your talents and your passions with others who are on board. And of course, in the programs that we have in each of the countries, we try to create experiential learning opportunities that could be about, for example, organic farming or nuclear disarmament or exchange with youth or visiting a refugee camp. We have lots of different programs where we're able to learn about the local realities in the countries that we're visiting. And that brings us to today's important project, which is about the Hibakusha project for a nuclear-free world. Peace Boat started this project in 2008, where we had over 103 survivors from the atomic bombs come on board the ship and give their testimonies as they were traveling the world. Because Peace Boat was founded in Japan, we also have a very strong connection to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as you can imagine. And we know that the survivors now are reaching the age where they're not going to be able to share their testimonies very much longer. And so as we count down the time that we have to share their testimonies, Peace Boat has put a major effort into bringing the voices of the survivors to all of the countries that we visit, and then also inviting young people like yourselves to be youth communicators and sharing their stories as we travel. The founder of Peace Boat, Yoshiko Tatsuya, here is also one of the leaders who has helped to bring forward the agenda for disarmament, peace, and collaboration with many different partners around the world. And this is a photo from Hiroshima, where we attended the Nobel Peace Laureates World Summit. And at this time, we launched a project also to declare a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. And so working with Nobel Peace Laureates has also been a major passion of Peace Boat. And with that, Peace Boat has joined also the steering committee, the international steering group of ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And as Mr. Markham mentioned, ICAN won the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. And we are traveling with the Nobel Peace Prize on the ship. Let's have a round of applause for ICAN. So today, we encourage all of you to take a photo with the Nobel Peace Prize, to use the Youth for Disarmament hashtag, to put it out there and let people know that ICAN won the Nobel Peace Prize and now it is traveling on the Peace Boat here in New York City, and that you attended this event and you are part of the movement. ICAN is one of the only organizations to win the Nobel Peace Prize, made up more than 400 partner organizations. And that's the first time that a group of people have won the Nobel Peace Prize. And now you're all part of this group. So thank you for being here. Yes, a round of applause for all of you for being here. And with that also, we have continued our activism and raising awareness for a nuclear-free world. This is a photo from the Peace Boat taking over with the background of New York City with the Ban Nuclear Weapons Now sign. So we are working towards a nuclear-free world in so many different ways. And of course, the ban on nuclear weapons is one of the most instrumental ways that we can work on this together with ICAN. And so you can visit our website and learn more about Peace Boat. I encourage you to find out more about the programs that we have on board. We work on nuclear disarmament as a major topic, but as I mentioned, we also work on all of the SDGs. And so for us, it's also important to have the SDGs connected with nuclear disarmament, with climate action, with sustainability, with human rights, peace building, partnerships. All of the SDGs are also related to nuclear disarmament. And in some way, this disarmament education, whether it be small arms, light weapons, you name it. It's so important to connect it together with all of the SDGs. And we hope that you will bring this message, because we find that young people really are active in climate action right now, as you could see with Greta Thunberg and all the young people that came to the climate march, especially in New York City. We hope that we can also have that much enthusiasm for disarmament education. So thank you for being here. And with that, I would also like to organize the next panel and introduce my colleague, Sumiko, who has been working in disarmament education for many years and also organizing our special global university program. So please give a big round of applause for Sumiko, who will be the moderator for the next session.
Thank you, Emilie. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. How do you feel? How is the ship? Good?
Good, very good.
How are you liking the program so far? Good? Okay, a little bit more enthusiasm might help. Yeah? Are you enjoying yourself right now?
Yes.
Yes, great, thank you. All right, so we have organized a three-pillar panel discussion for this coming an hour and a half. And just a practical note before we start, we don't have any official break in between the panels. So if you want to use the bathroom or want to take a small break, feel free to do so. The restroom is just outside the venue, right? So as we have heard in the introductory remark, the disarmament agenda of the UN Secretary General consists of three main pillars. The first one is disarmament to save humanity. The second one is disarmament to save lives. And thirdly, we have disarmament for future generations. So today's panel is organized with three themes. For each of the three panels, we have three speakers. One representing the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, and the second speaker will always be representing member states of the United Nations. And thirdly, we have a speaker representing a civil society organization who is, which is excelling, any organization excelling in that field will be presenting their work. And if you remember the remarks from Ms. Nakamitsu Izumi this morning, she emphasized the importance of collaboration between the UN, the government, and civil society organizations. So the idea is that we are able to hear from all these three different perspectives, and we get some hints in terms of what concrete actions you and we can take together to progress the disarmament agenda forward. Does this sound all right? Yes. All right. So I don't want to take too much time explaining what is going to happen, but why don't we start with the first panel? Let's see how I can make this go.
Disarmament agenda I'm launching today goes beyond nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. Disarmament concerns every country and all weapons, from hand grenades to hydrogen bombs. Deadly weapons put us all at risk, and leaders have a responsibility to minimize that risk.
I would like to start with the first panel. So this first panel is about weapons of mass destruction. And this morning we had an opportunity to hear from Mr. Fujimori, who is a survivor of an atomic bombing in Hiroshima. That was 75 years ago. We still have a lot of weapons of mass destruction. So I would like to invite three speakers working on this area of nuclear disarmament to hear from them what are some of the key activities they've been doing, what some of the key challenges that they think we are facing right now from their own respective perspective. And finally, we are also hoping to hear some, message for the participants in terms of what kind of actions they are expecting us to do after this panel discussion. So without further ado, Chris King, Rebecca, Hallin, Murphy Yanashima, if you could come up to the stage, please. So each of the speakers will have around 5 minutes, and I will ask all the speakers to stay on time. Thank you. All right, thank you so much for joining us today. Cool, great. So for each panel, the UN audio representative will go first, followed by a state representative, and then the last speaker will be from the civil society organization.
I'm going to assume, by the way, that everyone in this room is here because they have an interest in this topic and a little bit of understanding about this topic. But nevertheless, let's try and get on the same page. So I want to ask a few questions, noting that as you would have seen from the screen before, the first pillar, disarmament to save humanity, is about the elimination of weapons of mass destruction. First of all, what are weapons of mass destruction? Anyone? Yep. That's one. Yep. Anyone else? That's two. One more. There we go. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons are what are commonly referred to as weapons of mass destruction. All right. I think, given what we've heard today already, I'm really focused today on nuclear weapons. I'm going to focus today on nuclear weapons for a couple of reasons that I'll get to in a minute. But before I talk about nuclear weapons, can anyone tell me how many nuclear weapons there are in the world today? Yeah, that's true. There are too many. There's a lot too many. Should give you a hint. Okay. There's about 13,000, give or take, nuclear weapons left in the world today. And that sounds like a lot, but when you consider that that's down from a peak of about 70,000 during the 1980s, we have actually made some pretty decent progress in this regard. Who has nuclear weapons? Anyone? US is one, yep. China, yep. Sorry, I missed that one. What was one over there? I heard. Yep. Which Korea? Yeah, North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Yep. Russia. I heard China somewhere in there, do I? India, Pakistan, there we go. Israel's kind of Israel has neither confirmed nor denied the possession of nuclear weapons. So they're kind of a tough case. France is another one, there you go. Nope, Iran does not have nuclear weapons. UK, there we go. So you have the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, China, US, Russia, UK and France. And then on top of that, you also have India, Pakistan, DPRK, and maybe Israel. So, all right. Moving on from there. Why do we care about nuclear weapons? Why is this such an important topic? Why are so many people passionate about this? Why is it always on top of the headlines? Oh, you guys are asleep this afternoon. The point, I guess, that we're trying to get to the bottom of this is that nuclear weapons have what we would call potentially existential consequences. They are quite literally the most powerful weapons that have ever been made, and they are quite literally capable of wiping out all existence on the planet. For example, there's been a couple of studies released that you may have seen, one about India, Pakistan, and the possibility of a so-called limited nuclear war between those two countries, and one about what would happen in a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. In a so-called limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan, where not even their full arsenals were deployed, you're talking about enough smoke and debris being put into the sky to block out the sun and create a famine that would kill around 2 billion people, okay? And that's not an unrealistic prospect. The second major reason why we're extremely concerned and why we care so much about nuclear weapons is primarily because it would be a humanitarian catastrophe if any single nuclear weapon was used. No state in the world, not the United States, not Russia, not China, has the ability to respond to the humanitarian chaos that would be unleashed by a nuclear weapon being used in a major city, okay? So those, I guess, are the reasons why we are doing what we're doing. The key question then is, well, what are we doing? And so from a UN perspective, I just wanted to outline some of the efforts that have been ongoing to try and reduce the dangers posed by nuclear weapons, to bring about their total elimination. And I think as the Secretary's General's agenda makes clear, there are two major norms that we care about when it comes to nuclear weapons. The first is the norm of non-use, which is precisely what this gentleman was talking about before, making sure that nuclear weapons are never used again. And the second is the achievement of a world free of nuclear weapons, okay? And those two things go hand in hand for us. For the UN, the elimination of nuclear weapons has actually been on our agenda almost since the very beginning. The very first resolution of the General Assembly relates to the elimination of what were then called atomic weapons, the creating of a commission for the elimination of atomic weapons. Since then, there's been a lot of efforts to try and go through to eliminate these weapons. There are a variety of treaties in place to do so. Does anyone know what any of those treaties might actually be? ICAN, please don't raise your hand. NPT, did I get the NPT? Yeah, exactly. So the NPT is the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which was signed and opened in 1968 for signature and entered into force in 1970. It's important for 3 reasons, okay? The first is that it is the only treaty that contains legally binding obligations on 5 nuclear armed states, the nuclear weapon states, which again are those permanent 5 of the Security Council. It contains verifiable safeguards on peaceful use of nuclear energy for any non-nuclear weapon state, and it is almost universal. So it's one of the most subscribed to treaties of any treaty, not just in peace and security or disarmament. And so as a result, what happens in the framework of the NPT tends to have ramifications for the entire international community. In the 1960s, President Kennedy said that, by this time, so 50 years from now, we could have upwards of 20 to 30 nuclear armed states. The fact that we don't is a testament to the success of the NPT, all right? Anyone know any other treaties out there? No? Has everyone ever heard of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty? Okay. Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty is what it sounds like. It's meant to comprehensively ban nuclear tests, but it has one major flaw. It has yet to enter into force because several nuclear armed states and some non-nuclear weapon states have yet to sign or ratify it. Then we have, of course, and I'm hoping my ICAN colleague will talk more about this in a minute, we have the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is a much more recent eventuality, and that happened came about in 2017. And it was the result of a really large majority of member states of the United Nations voting in favour for adopting that treaty, 122, if I'm not mistaken. But of course, that treaty has yet to enter into force. So it currently is not legally binding. And the second part of that is that no nuclear armed state or any of their allies actually participated in the negotiation of that treaty. There's a bit of a theme here in case you're missing it. So in addition to the treaties that we have, there are also other efforts, including regional efforts that might be of interest, and those are nuclear weapon-free zones. So there's a bunch of nuclear weapon-free zones. There's a nuclear weapon-free zone in the South Pacific, there's a nuclear weapon-free zone in Southeast Asia, there's a nuclear weapon-free zone in Central Asia, there's a nuclear weapon-free zone in Latin America and the Caribbean, there's a nuclear weapon-free zone in Africa, and there's a treaty in Antarctica which effectively makes that a nuclear weapon-free zone too. So you could practically say that the entirety of the Southern Hemisphere is actually one contiguous nuclear weapon-free zone. And again, has gone some way to helping reduce the dangers posed by nuclear weapons. But we have made some significant progress, as I said. We have gone down from thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons to what we have today. We have some significant treaties in place. But unfortunately, if you've been following the news, you probably realised that a lot of that good progress is now very much in danger of going backwards, if it's not already going backwards. Who here has heard of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty? Yep. Someone want to tell me what it is? Okay. Yep.
The INF Treaty was this bilateral agreement between the US and Russia in which they agreed to ban and eliminate all ground-launched ballistic missiles and cruise missiles with a range from 500 to 5,000 kilometers.
Who needs Wikipedia? There you go. That was pretty good, man. So yes, but the key part of that treaty is the fact that it was the very first treaty to actually ban an entire category of nuclear weapons for the two largest nuclear weapon holders. And so it was a really important part of ending the Cold War. As you also may know, that treaty recently collapsed because the United States pulled out of it, largely because they were very much of the opinion that Russia was cheating on the treaty. And my time is up. Oh my God, that was super quick. Let me finish by saying this, right? Things are not looking really good for nuclear disarmament right now. I'm sure these guys are going to talk about that in a moment. And so the key question I guess you want to hear is, what can you people do about it? I think as I said, you're all here because you care about these issues. So the first thing I would say is educate yourselves. And the second thing I would say is it's really easy if you're interested in these issues to believe in nuclear disarmament. What is not easy is convincing those people who are not interested or who do not believe it is a problem. So one thing that we need to talk about today and that you need to talk about today is how do you get the message across that this is important, that this affects everyone, that this relates to everyone's future. We often say that there are two existential threats to humanity, climate change and nuclear weapons. Okay, I don't think people really tend to equate nuclear weapons on that same path, but trust me, it is up there. And then I think the second thing that I really would urge you to do today is to think about what is it going to look like in the future. You know, we've had 70 years basically of a Cold War era framework, but that is rapidly changing. So how can we think about disarmament in a new age? How can we include things like cybersecurity threats, artificial intelligence? Some of the things that are going to be talked about by my colleague in the next panel, in the third panel, I should say. How can we think about those in the context of the nuclear issue? And then I will shut up. Okay.
Thank you so much, Chris. I forgot to mention in the introduction that there will be a group discussion that you all be involved after this panel. So our next speaker in this panel is Rebecca Hallin. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca. And she is a Swedish disarmament diplomat who just joined, if I understand, the EU delegation in New York. So Rebecca, please tell us your view on EU's perspective or Swedish perspective on nuclear disarmament. The floor is yours.
It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm looking forward to these discussions and the conversations that we're going to have. And before we get on to talk about disarmament of weapons of mass destruction with the particular focus on nuclear weapons, let me start on a personal note, just to put things a bit into context. In 2016, I came home to Stockholm from a posting in Colombia. And more or less by accident, I ended up in the Department for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Stockholm. And suddenly, I was the responsible person for an abundance of acronyms. And I think one problem with engaging people outside of our bubble of diplomats and civil servants is this alphabet soup. It's really difficult to see where you as an individual or group or community can fit into that and what you can do. And Chris gave some examples, and I hope we can speak more about, engagement and how that can affect the way things are going right now. And this is also one of the reasons why I applaud the Secretary General's disarmament agenda, because it helps us. It helps us connecting the dots between you, between me, and all these acronyms. And it explains why disarmament is a matter that concerns all of us. And in the agenda, very closely connected to the first pillar that we're speaking about right now, disarmament to save humanity, the Secretary General talks about the return of Cold War tensions. And the fact that there's a return of weapons of mass destruction to the political arena some 30 years later is a very chilling realization, not least from a European perspective. During the Cold War, Europe was one of the potential battlefields of a nuclear war between the two sides. And the system of international and bilateral treaties that was set up to prevent this from happening is now starting to erode. And when this starts to happen, when restrictions, regulations, legally binding treaties that are restricting weapons of mass destruction is about to erode or cease to exist, etc., then it is a concern for all of us. And I will once again refer to what Chris said, and also thank you so much for the very good definition of the INF, because this bilateral treaty between the US and Russia has been central for European security. And now, it entered into force in 1988, and in August, it no longer was in force anymore. Under the INF, almost 3,000 missiles equipped with either nuclear warheads or conventional warheads were removed from European soil and destroyed. And as the High Representative of Disarmament Affairs said the other day, is that the disarmament machinery is the barometer of international security. And unfortunately, that barometer right now is showing a lot of thunderstorms. And serving to ease some of these tensions, the disarmament agenda of the Secretary General offers support, guidelines, and measures on how states can fulfill long-standing disarmament commitments. And a way, and maybe this is even more important, a way for states to do this together, because this is also something that has been eroding. With the international treaties, bilateral treaties, the cooperation is also becoming less and less. And out of these 40 actions set out in the implementation plan of the agenda, each of them are a concrete contribution to disarmament. And we, as the European Union, we're very happy to, so far, we're able to support 4 of these actions. And together with member states, it's 17 in total. Hopefully, there will be more, but don't quote me on that. And as you're going to hear today, as we continue our discussion, is that there are many different perceptions of what security is. And some of these perceptions are completely opposing. There can be one side saying that it is, right now, impossible to disarm, or to pursue the commitments on disarmament that we promised in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, some almost 50 years ago. Why? Because the security situation is so dire right now. And then you can find another side saying that this is exactly why we have to do this right now. It cannot wait. Not only is it necessary, it's also the only viable way for security. So there are many different perspectives on this. And I think one thing, you can agree or disagree or be somewhere in between or have your own perception, but I think one underlying thing is that you need to listen to each other, otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. And I'm also saying this because I'm working in an organization with 28 member states. Add to that the fact that we are then working in the UN. This is like being in the world's largest group project in school. And we all know that can be challenging, to say the least. But in spite of this, I firmly believe that the only way to face these challenges that we see today is by doing it together. And with that, I'm going to cut this short. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing your ideas and your thoughts about these matters. Thank you.
Excellent. Last but not least, for this panel, I would like to invite Murphy Yanashima, Program Officer for Peace and Human Rights at Soka Gakkai International, SGI. SGI is also a partner organization of ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. So today he is representing both ICAN and SGI. The floor is yours, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Thanks to Sumiko for the kind introduction. My name is Murphy Yanashima, obviously from Japan, but I go by Murphy. I know it is random, but it should be easy. I work at an international NGO based on Buddhist philosophy, that is the Soka Gakkai International, or SGI, that has been working closely with ICAN as its international partner since 2007. I'm sure you're already familiar with this, but the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, adopted in July 2017, now has 79 signatories and 32 ratified states. So 18 more to go for its entry into force. In this regard, Beatrice Finn, Executive Director of ICAN, recently mentioned that the entry into force of TPNW will most likely happen next year in 2020, which marks the 50th anniversary of NPT. Let me briefly outline how the SGI, as an ICAN partner, works for the entry into force of TPNW. The SGI has a global network of over 12 million membership across 192 countries. Of course, only a few of those 12 million work for this issue as a full-time job, and they are based here in New York, Geneva, and Tokyo. My colleagues in New York and Geneva are so active that they always make friends who are diplomats or policymakers whenever they attend international conferences. And there, they lobby for the ratification of TPNW. One thing that happened this year was that the government of Guyana, one of the Caribbean states, was willing to host the regional conference in cooperation with ICAN and the SGI to gather high-level politicians and officials of Ministry of Foreign Affairs from a number of Caribbean states in order to discuss the importance of ratifying TPNW in terms of security in their region. Some of such states that joined the conference did ratify the treaty later this year. This is, however, just one of the approaches to the non-nuclear weapon states, or pro-TPNW states. Another initiative that my SGI colleague has been taking part is the ICAN Cities Appeal. This is to encourage not the states, but the cities to show their support for TPNW by passing resolutions as such in their Congress. One of my colleagues at SGI USA here in the States is very active in this Cities Appeal initiative, and when he approached politicians in Washington, D.C., he actually succeeded to convince them and have the capital of this nuclear superpower, United States, pass a resolution supporting TPNW. This was a big news indeed, and certainly gave hope for those who had been working for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Also in Japan too, although the Japanese government insists on their effort in bridging the gap between nuclear states and non-nuclear states, the government has not taken TPNW seriously. We as the SGI has long been putting efforts into creating a forum of dialogue between the government and civil society to make sure our voices are heard, especially that of Hibakusha, and to push the government to ratify the TPNW. Another important initiative we are also taking part is the universalization of the spirit behind the TPNW through disarmament education and grassroots activities to raise public awareness. For this case, the SGI in cooperation with ICAN has created the anti-nuclear weapons exhibition, Everything You Treasure, for a world free from nuclear weapons. This exhibition begins with a question. Please imagine what you treasure in your daily life, and ask yourself, does a nuclear weapon protect it? With this simple question, the exhibition examines the issue of nuclear weapons from 12 different perspectives, including environment, gender, economics, and human rights, and ask the audience if we can coexist with such inhumane weapons. In the past 7 years, this exhibition has been held in more than 90 cities in 21 countries. I hope that grassroots movement or disarmament education tool like this exhibition can provide forum for dialogue among ordinary people like me and my close friends who may have no clue about this issue, to bring it at a personal level where we can could relate to it. Because ordinary people like us are by far the largest and strongest constituencies in the world. This way we can spread the spirit behind the TPNW, which is a clear vision of the shared interests of humankind. In the end, I'd like to share the words of SJ President Daisaku Ikeda, that human beings are best able to advance not when driven by fear of a catastrophe, but when guided by the prospect of hope-filled objectives. I believe that youth can present the world with a hope-filled objective. Now is the time to come together and work in unity to protect everything we all treasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you also being, keeping your remarks in time. And I guess, Murphy's comments highlight that one of the benefits of civil society organization is sometimes to be able to, in a positive way, bypass states and connect cities and city to cities, people to people, to highlight some of the key messages of the campaign. I guess we have a couple of minutes, so if any of you have any questions, I think I have time to take maybe one. Two. All right, I think you had a question from before, so why don't you start? And hopefully I'll take yours too. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ramel Jackson. Say if treaty gets passed, what kind of incentives do you put in those type of treaties to make sure that they stay put, and it makes it harder for countries to back out when they feel like it's necessary for war or so.
Is it specifically about the treaty of the prohibition of nuclear weapons or any treaties?
No, I'm saying for nuclear weapons. What kind of incentives do you create to make sure that people don't back out when they feel like they want to?
Sure. I guess it could concern all the speakers, so if anyone who wants to. Okay.
It's a tough question. Obviously, if you're looking at multilateral treaties in particular, many states will not actually sign up to a treaty that they can't withdraw from. So if you look at the NPT, for example, one of the biggest problems has been that Article 10 of that treaty allows for withdrawal. That's been a huge problem because North Korea withdrew from the NPT and then announced that it had a nuclear weapons program. And so that has spurred a lot of thinking about, well, what do you do to ensure that if a state does withdraw from a treaty, how do you make sure that if they can't withdraw and then break out and have a nuclear weapons program? And that would include things like, well, any nuclear equipment that they had received under that treaty, because the NPT actually allows for the peaceful use of nuclear energy as well. Any equipment or nuclear power reactors, whatever, has to be handed back. These kind of things, or that that safeguards, verification of their facilities has to be ongoing. But primarily, the ultimate resort for anyone who in the UN system, for any state that withdraws from a treaty and acts in violation of that treaty, is the Security Council. And so, for example, that's why there's so many sanctions on North Korea. But beyond that, you want to have as many benefits as possible, as many incentives as possible for staying in the treaty. The problem with the bilateral treaties in the INF in particular is that that's a bilateral treaty between two countries, between two states. And their incentives for staying in that were very particular to the time frame in which it was constructed. I would argue that those incentives should still hold, but clearly they felt differently. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, let me just add just an experience. I know that during the negotiation of the treaty with the prohibition of nuclear weapons, one suggestion was made, because you sit down and you discuss all the articles over and over again, and everyone who participated, have the chance to put forward their suggestions. And one suggestion that was made to the withdrawal article, because every
treaty has one, basically, was that, yes, it has to be possible to withdraw from this multilateral treaty. But what if it was made, and this is not what happened, but this was an idea, what if it was made as when every nuclear weapons state has signed up, that then no one can withdraw? And and that would be it didn't happen, and it was, a loose idea, but that would be a way of, especially when it comes to the prohibition of nuclear weapons, that it's not possible to withdraw from that promise. I don't see that happening, not in the TPNW and not in many other treaties, but it was still a way, a way to think of it.
Thank you. All right, one more question. I think you had a question, so this is going to be the last question. If you can introduce yourself, keep the question short, that'll be wonderful. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Mark, a junior from the University of Pennsylvania. So I think all of us in this room really care about this issue, and that's why we're here. But my question is, does Youth for Disarmament Initiative have any specific programs or policies or processes by which young people can participate and engage? And in other words, how can we help you, and how can we assist and contribute to your work and operations?
Excellent, thank you. How can we?
One's actually for my colleagues at the back, I think, more than anything else in terms of the specific program. I'm not actually responsible for the running of the program. But again, as I said earlier, and Sue, I don't know if you want to talk about this. Nope. As I said, I think the way that you can help us the most is through activism and education. Those are by far and away the most helpful tools for us. And as I said, specifically, working with people who do not necessarily share your same point of view to try and create common ground, or to try and convince them about the veracity and the intensity and the importance of this issue is really, really important. Debunking myths surrounding nuclear weapons, things like, well, nuclear weapons stop war, and that sort of stuff is really important. And I think that if I could ask you to do anything coming out of today, that would certainly be to develop an action plan and a strategy for that.
So just one general thing that I always think about, because sometimes I do believe it's good to have a strategy and a good plan, but sometimes it's also your day-to-day actions that matters. So usually when I meet people outside of the disarmament bubble, where we all, we dig into this, and they ask me, so what do you work with? And I was like, no, I work with nuclear disarmament or disarmament. They're like, oh, wow, that sounds really serious. And I tell them, yes, it is. It's really serious. Should I be worried? And I say, yes, you should. For good reason. Because during my lifetime, and I'm about to turn 35, I have never been, at least consciously, aware of a more dangerous time than we're in right now. So I think conveying this message, and just as Chris is saying, educate yourself and educate others. And as a lot of Americans like to say, call your congressman or woman, make the people with the power of decision actually know that you care about these issues. I think that's a good way to help and support. Great.
I just second, what was said, but I used to be a salesperson selling lights. When I was a university student, I did have an interest in this issue, but I, end up selling lights in a sense. But somehow I cared about this issue, and at some point in life, I happened to be, working for this issue. Rebecca said, I think it's very important to keep the interest and talk about it in your daily life. And even if you end up doing something else, but at some point, I think you will contribute to the issue. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the speakers. Please join me in giving a big applause to the three speakers.